if I'm being honest, I was dreading this whole process this week because I knew what I wanted to talk about and I just wasn't sure how that was all going to go. And of course, I would have saved myself a whole lot of wasted thought had I just looked at the texts, because the texts for today line up perfectly with what I really felt was important. Timing is everything, they say, and in this case, they're not wrong. A woman of power and a woman metaphoric who is described as a whore, and gender-based violence is enacted upon her. So those are our texts for today, and I hope that you see the irony there. If you do see the irony there, stick around. You're going to enjoy today. Kind of, If you don't see the irony there, now would probably be a good time just to stop, because you're probably not going to like where we go. So the contrast between today's two women is stark. And this bears repeating. So I will probably do so a couple of times, but the New Testament woman for today is not a woman, not a historical person. This is a metaphor. Keep that in mind, please. It is a metaphor of Rome, in fact, but we'll talk about that later. So the obvious ways in which there's stark contrast between these two women, we're going to start there. We have a prominent, wealthy leader versus a temptress living her life to draw people down. Both women are prominent for sure, but the reasons for their prominence are vastly different. One is recognized and validated. The other is vilified. Perhaps the less recognized is the transition of the view of women from one text to the next. As I look back over the last 30 weeks, can you believe this is week 30? The trend is clear. Women who in Israelite history and world history, as is the case today, were recognized as leaders in their own right. Yet somehow, by the time of Jesus, the view of women shifted, at least in the eyes of many in the early church and in surrounding nations at that time. So we're going to dig in just a little bit here. The Queen of Sheba visits King Solomon to see if the hype is real, and prepared for the fact that it was. She also went to honor him, to collaborate, right? To just see, who is this guy? What is captured in this text is the exchange between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. The word exchange is significant here. Solomon returns the treatment to the queen. Look, if you're not going to name her, I'm just going to keep calling her queen, and I'm going to call Solomon. Yep. So he also then returns and shares generously with her from his treasure trove. I'm in a small group currently at my church reading through the Bible in this process called Immerse. There's something about it that has me seeing things I've never seen before, experiencing scripture differently, wrestling with God through so much of it. And so while I do believe it's on everybody to do their own reading, absolutely, I also think it's the responsibility of pastors to expose congregants to the vast offerings of the Bible rather than recycling the same passages based on liturgical cycles. I said what I said. I know that I'm going to get pushback on that from other pastors, but hear me out. How many of you have heard of the Queen of Sheba in this context? I know that the portion of Kings that this story is in is a portion that I read in seminary. It's one of the few required readings I completed entirely. My little light just died. I'm not going to start over, so we'll just do this. Little laptop glow. And yet I don't recall this story. So the logical question is, why does it matter? Why does a small, very limited verse story of an exchange between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba matter to those of us who identify today as Christians? I mean, the Bible isn't small. There's a whole lot going on there. So why? It matters because Solomon recognized and respected her as a powerful leader, equal in power and rank to him. It matters because she recognizes God, despite the fact that she likely worshiped a different God in her home. It matters because she is a woman of power, a leader. She is wise and she is generous, and she is all of that on her own, in her own right. Solomon recognizes this in her and welcomes her and her questions because he knows that she is justified in wanting to validate his competence as king. In context, this is a story meant to highlight how far God's name and Solomon's influence had spread. It displays the growing recognition of of Israel as a nation in its own right among the surrounding nations. In part, I believe these are the reasons for the story passing down through the generations until they were captured on scrolls. For us today, though, the purpose looks different. There's the obvious message of faithfulness to God results in blessing, or infidelity results in the opposite, or that the people were meant to be examples of faith in God so that others might come to know the same God as the one true God. There are also the less obvious meanings for us today. A subtle wink from the Spirit to girls and women who live in a faith culture that tells them they are less than. They are only valid in connection to the men in their lives, and their purposes are limited to raising children and supporting their husbands. It is part of the thread of the Spirit's whisper, reminding us that if Solomon recognized the Queen of Sheba without justification and without minimizing, without asking what man she lives with, then it isn't God who limits women. It is certain men in certain branches of Christianity. So in contrast to the unnamed yet validated and respected Queen of Sheba, we are provided with this metaphoric woman named a whore and the violence that is enacted against her. Scholars tend to agree, again, that the woman is meant to be Rome, an example of a rampant, sinful city. On its own, I don't love that, but what pushes it over the edge for me is that then the final destruction of said city is described through very specifically gendered violence. It played right into the fear that women are temptresses with the power to destroy entire cities with their wiles, which allowed it to resonate well with the original recipients of these visions. To be clear, I do not like that this was the image described, and I choose to believe that if you believe that John of Patmos was simply recording visions from God, that he took liberties to do so. I choose to believe, based on the remainder of the witness of Scripture, that God did not intend for images such as this to be used to harm women in the way that it has. And so now here we are today, November 10, 2024. And I find myself living in a country where women are living in contrast to one another. On the one side are women who know and see the indwelling Spirit of God in everyone they meet, who know that no one should have a say over what happens to another human's body. No one, not the government, not the church, not a husband or father or brother. On the other side are women who find themselves in branches of Christianity and life that tell them they deserve more than another, that they are not free to make their own decisions, that God, in fact, created them to live forever behind a man, and that to choose to live without one or without children removes their right to speak into anything. One set of these women fought with and voted for the woman who is known and respected for her knowledge, wisdom, power, and empathy, her fight for the basic rights of all humanity. And another set celebrated when the one who enacts and supports the enactment of violence against women, themselves included, was chosen to ascend the throne. They claim it was all God's doing. Well, I don't know about you, but to me, it is abundantly clear that God does not support or uplift degradation, essay, racism, bribery, manipulation. In the last 30 weeks, we've discussed woman upon woman who prove that God does not limit the ways in which or the roles to which a woman is called. God is a God who wants believers to be lights to any and all that they may find, so that any and all may find their way to God. God is not a God who supports a caste system. God is not a God who supports a caste system. God is not a God of nationalism. God does not place one country above another. Religion does that. Christian nationalism does that. Not God. It was always clear to me that this series was about showing that how certain branches of Christianity view women is not how God views women. What I now realize is that I truly thought it was the men that needed this message. It is now abundantly clear, sisters, that we need to reach our sisters on the other side, not to bring them to our way of thinking, but to help them see who they truly are, not through a limited lens, but who they truly are, who God has created them to be. Sisters, we are called, and make no mistake, we need to be speaking. So let's go. One of the ways you can speak, it's so easy. Subscribe, like, comment, share. If we want this to be out for others to see, that's what has to happen. Otherwise, it's just lost in the sea of YouTube. And I can't do that on my own. So if you're watching, if you've been here for 30 weeks or if this is week 1, I'm going to ask you to interact and I'm going to ask you to share. We'll be back next week. Take care.